I'd laid down maybe 3 minutes and just heard him yell out for me from our living room. And I instantly knew by the tone in his voice that something was really wrong. And so I jumped up and I ran into the living room to find him having a medical episode. You know, I'm in that little small room that you see on the movies and the TV shows waiting, and this doctor keeps coming back and she's giving me updates, asking me questions. And then I remember at one point I told her, "You can't let him die. Today's our daughter's birthday." And I was thinking about my sweet little girl who was gonna wake up so excited for her birthday, and her daddy wasn't gonna be there.
Hi everyone, welcome to In the Middle. I'm Jennifer.
I'm Natasha.
And I'm Tiffany.
And today we are going to talk about joy. We're going to talk about having hope.
Yeah.
It's hard to have joy and hope when you're getting hit with hardship and with grief, but the goal is to live a lifestyle of joy and hope, and that's possible. So how do y'all feel about that? Let's talk about some things that we've been through.
It's very different for each and every person of how we process grief, because it can look different depending on the situation that each person is going through. Right. But we see time and time again that God is in the midst of our grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me in particular, coming out of a season of immense grief and sorrow, it's been so sweet to see the Lord walk not only me, but my kids through it. And so it's encouraging. And I know that even though there's different levels of grief, different types of grief, it's a topic that everybody can relate to.
I know for me, the situations and seasons that come out of nowhere, those are almost paralyzing. It's like you can be prepared for different personality types that can cause hardship or different things like that, or you can see a job loss coming. But there's certain things that just, oh my gosh, it's just out of nowhere and you're not ready for it. And even, I know we're all people of, strong faith. Right. It's still hard and makes you question things.
And it's very hard, especially when it's unplanned, right? When something that you never thought would happen happens to you. So Tiffany, I would love for you to share.
Okay.
What did God recently walk you and your family through?
Sure. Well, so April of 2022, my husband of 10 years very suddenly passed away from a pulmonary embolism. It happened to be on our daughter's 8th birthday. And so extremely, unplanned and very sudden and heartbreaking, as you can imagine. But basically the night, it was, the very late hours of the night prior, April 4th, he and I were at home and setting up for her birthday. That's going to be the next day, and getting balloons and presents and all the things ready that, any kid is excited to get the next day. And so that's what we were doing, and put the kids to bed and did the nighttime routine. He was such a sweet, sweet dad. And so he actually, that night in particular, he did that. He gave the girls, we've got 3 little girls, a bath and put them to bed, read them their stories. And then we have a son. And so they watched a basketball game together on the couch. And then he sent him to bed. And so then it was just kind of like our time to hang out. And we had decorated and got everything ready. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go get ready for bed. And so I'd laid down maybe 3 minutes and just heard him yell out for me from our living room. And I instantly knew by the tone in his voice that something was really wrong. And so I jumped up and I ran into the living room to find him having a medical episode, and instantly called 911. And within 7 minutes, there were 6 firefighters, 2 paramedics in my living room trying to do life-saving measures for him. And by the grace of God, our kids did not wake up. And those are those moments where even though tragedy was there, I could see and feel the presence of the Lord, because that would have been so traumatic for them to witness. And so they got him out to the ambulance, and I would later find out, I didn't know right away, but he coded in the ambulance, and they took him onto the hospital and worked on him for a couple of hours. And so it was there literally in the waiting. I'm in that little small room that you see on the movies and the TV shows waiting, and this doctor keeps coming back and she's giving me updates, asking me questions. And then I remember at one point I told her, "You can't let him die. Today's our daughter's birthday," because it had passed the midnight hour. And so it's crazy looking back, even though in that moment I was a wife, I was a mom too. And I was thinking about my sweet little girl who was going to wake up so excited for her birthday, and her daddy wasn't going to be there. So I remember the doctor saying to me, she said, I'm not going to stop trying. He's younger than me. He was 37. And so she went back into the room and worked on him some more and came back out a final time and just looked at me and said, I am so sorry. We've done everything we can do, but he did not make it. If you want to come back and say goodbye to him, you can. And, in that moment, it's just paralyzing shock because like you said, he wasn't sick that I knew of. There was no kind of preparation. 2 hours prior, we're in our living room talking and laughing, and my family is just this sweet little perfect thing. And then now everything I knew to be true had crumbled around me. And I'll never forget going in that room and just seeing him there and just praying over his body and worshiping. I remember saying to my family, my mom, came with me, and I said, I just want to worship. And so we turned some worship music on my phone and listened to that and sang over him. And at one point I dropped down to the ground and just grabbed onto his arm. And I said out loud, I said, God, you're good. You have good things for me. You have good things for my children. So even in that moment of despair, just being led by the Spirit, I knew I had to confess that. I knew I needed to cling to that and speak that. And at that point, firefighters were still in the room. The nurses were still there. I mean, they were in and out trying to get everything situated. But I mean, from the jump, like I came face to face with having to decide, is God still good? When nothing around you is good, I mean, you're literally in the room with your husband's body. Is he still good? And I knew in that moment that he was. It didn't mean I wasn't extremely sorrowful. It didn't mean that there wasn't shock and disbelief and questioning and all the things that would come. But I held on to that truth from that moment on. It was really like my declaration that God, you're good. I don't know what you're doing and I don't understand why you're doing it, but I believe you're good. Yeah.
So I really loved how you shared in your story that you saw like glimpses of the Lord, like his presence, just from the moment of you being able to have that moment with your husband while your children were asleep. And I would love for you to just even share with, maybe a mother who is recently a widow or someone who is grieving a loved one. How can they be more in tune or even a bit more intentional with being able to see the goodness of God?
Right.
And is that, truly possible?
Yeah. I think it is. I mean, it's in those quiet, tender moments where if you're just quiet, you will hear it, you'll feel it. And there's some things that I didn't even realize in the moment, but when I look back on, I remember I would go on walks after his death. It was just like my time to be with the Lord, to pray, to cry, all the things, process. And one particular morning, I was like, God, where were you? Like, where were you? You could have stopped this. He was a man of God. Like, our family served you. Why us? And where were you? And in the most loving way, I felt him say, I was right there with you, Tiffany. Like, he could have died. He was a college coach and traveled all the time. He could have been in a hotel room by himself and we didn't know about it. He could have been driving with a pulmonary embolism. It's very sudden. But I gave you a sweet, tender night at home with your family, and your children were asleep. They never woke up. We have a doorbell camera. It did not get any of the footage, which I'm so glad. None of the footage of coming and going of medical personnel. And his last words to me as they took him out of our house, he looked at me and he said, I love you, babe. And I said, I love you too. I'll be at the hospital in a minute. I was waiting for my mom to get there, my mom and my sister to stay with the kids. And so those were his last words to me. And I think if you'll just steady your heart and listen, or even just look around at some of the things that have happened, you will find the fingerprints and the goodness of God.
I want to back up even before that, because had you not been in the place to choose God, that even if you don't, I still trust you. You had to arrive at that place and you were there before that night.
Right.
So can you speak to your journey to get there?
Yeah. Everyone has their ups and downs and their stories in life. I grew up in the church, and so thankfully I had that foundation of faith, but I also had different times in life where I had to find it for myself. And, that foundation was there, and I'm so thankful for that I already knew the character of God, but there's a difference in knowing the character of God and feeling the character of God. And so I knew it on an intellectual and a spiritual level prior to my husband's passing, but after his passing, I felt it and I saw it in a totally different way. But yeah, that foundation was there. But if it's not there for someone, if you are, new to the faith, or you're a believer that's still experiencing, life and trying to figure out what that looks like, God is so faithful to meet you where you are. By no means am I a quote unquote like elite believer. I took what I had and I was like, God, this is what I have to offer. Do with it what you can. And he was so faithful and sweet to meet me in those places and to refine different things and help me see, what areas maybe I was lacking in or struggling. And he just met me where I am. So where I was and still am at this point.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So what were some of the declarations that you prayed over yourself and your family? Because I did hear you mention that in the story, that there were just certain words that you were declaring and praying over.
Sure. On the way home, I remember leaving the hospital because I told my mom, I was like, we have to get home. It's her birthday and she can't wake up and neither one of us be there. And so I turned into my subdivision and I remember, thinking to myself, it's not over. Yeah. I'm not giving up. I'm going to fight with everything in me. So there was already that internal decision that like, I'm not giving up. But I would say things like, I have the mind of Christ whenever I would have like a really hard moment, or I would start to go down that rabbit hole of why and the what ifs and what if we would have just, X, Y, and Z. And so I would just say I have the mind of Christ. I would say, God, you're good. You have good things for me. I would just tell myself, choose joy. Sometimes all I could say was just Jesus, like, Lord, help me. Jesus, be near to me. And also, there's people that love to give different adages and well-meaning advice, but it doesn't always help. And so I told my children, I said, when people say things to you that do not resonate with your spirit, they don't make your heart feel better, just say in your heart, I don't receive that. Because we had people tell us, life is over, essentially. You're not going to be happy again. Your birthday's ruined. The best days are behind you. And I just didn't believe that because I know who my God is. And I was believing that he was going to redeem this loss. He was going to restore us and that we were going to rebuild. It didn't mean we didn't need to grieve and heal and advance from where we were, but I knew in my heart that that was possible. And so I just, would teach them little things and I would declare different things over us, but it was really important for me. And probably the biggest thing that I said through the process was, we're going to grieve, but we're going to grieve well. And it's for a season. It's not going to be forever because a lot of people around us made it sound like this is your plot in life. From here on out, you're the widow, they're the grieving children. And while I knew it was necessary for that to be the case, I knew it needed to be for a season, not for the rest of our lives. Yeah.
So one thing in your story that I think about is getting to joy, and the joy of the Lord is our strength. And so, but again, you already had your trust in God.
Yeah.
So let's talk real quick about the person who is still searching for joy, still searching for hope, and you can't have your joy in the Lord if you don't believe the Lord is faithful.
Right.
So you chose joy, you chose trust in a moment that for the normal human would go, God's not faithful.
Yeah.
God's not trustworthy. And then part of your story you haven't even gotten to yet is that your mom then passed away just a few months later. So double loss, double grief, chose joy again. So there's no expedited process. We're all in our own timeline with the Lord. But can you encourage the person listening who feels they're in that moment if their trust in the Lord is broken, so they don't even see how to find the joy?
I mean, first and foremost, I would just say it's okay to be weary. It's okay to question God. He can handle your questions. He can handle your pain. And this sounds like I just had this cookie cutter, ribbon on top grieving experience. There were many, many dark, heavy nights and times that I had to wrestle with the Lord. And I brought my questions to him. I brought my complaints, my concerns, and I was confident that he could handle it though. Just like when my kids come to me, there's times where I may sit down and lay it out and really explain. And then there's times I'm like, you just got to trust me. You just got to trust that you can't run in the street. And so there were different things and instances where I was like, I don't understand this, God, but I do trust you. And so I think that that's an important thing. At some point, we're human and we're not going to understand the big picture. And as much healing as has taken place thus far, there are still things I don't understand. I can still sit here and say, I'm so thankful for where I'm at, but I don't understand why my husband died at 37 and left, our children and me here. I have faith that God's redeeming it and that good is coming and good is here, but I don't understand. And so coming to the place where I'm at peace, not understanding, because I'm not God and he is, and he's sovereign, and things could have, been done differently, but they weren't for whatever reason. And so just coming to the resolution that I don't understand it, God, but I do trust you.
Yeah. Can we talk more about how you walked this out with your children?
Yeah.
Because that situation can paralyze you as a wife to then paralyze you as a mom to help your kids. So how did you help them and are still helping them walk life out to the fullest of the grief, the fullest of the joy, and getting to hope?
Yeah. So I have a background in counseling. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then my master's degree is in counseling. And so I definitely drew from that clinical side. And I knew that there were going to be things that we needed to do and things that we needed to not do in order to help us along the process. But I got them all in therapy. They did group grief counseling with other children who had lost a parent. And then they did individual grief therapy. And it was the most amazing experience. But I also just talked to them, and I gave them the freedom to be sad, but I also gave them the permission to be happy. And I told them, your dad would want you happy. I didn't want them to feel guilt for laughing and having joy. I mean, I had little kids. My youngest was 2, and then my oldest was 13 at the time. And so babies, 2, 5, and 8, and 13. And laughter was a part of our home. My husband was so fun and just silly. He danced with them, played with them. And it was like the air was sucked out of our home for those first few weeks. And I remember thinking, this is not our norm. And so I welcomed joy into our spaces. And we were really fortunate to be gifted some different trips and experiences that helped us. But there was guilt with that. I didn't want people to think, oh, well, now they're fine, or they're getting to go X, Y, and Z. They don't really care. And I had to get to the point even with myself where I was like, you know what? The people that know our hearts understand, and they want this for us. And so just encouraging my kids, but also giving them boundaries and holding them accountable, because we were lavished with so much love and support. There was a sense of entitlement at times because they were kind of getting whatever they wanted. And I remember having to set up the boundary that, you know what? Thank you so much for this gift. I'm going to hold on to it, and I'll give it to them when I feel like they're ready. Because it was creating some issues. And I sat them down and I told them, guys, we can have all the emotions associated with grief. You can be angry, sad, maybe not understand, frustrated, questioning, but you're still going to be respectful to one another, to me. We still have to go to school. We still have to go to work. We're not going to hurt ourselves. We're not going to hurt each other. And so helping them even develop what it looked like, from a really young level to grieve and to grieve well, because it's easy to think we get a pass, but you get a pass. You can go and do whatever, and that's where you see these destructive tendencies come to be. I still had to follow the law. I couldn't speed, I still had to get up and get ready and pay my bills. The water company didn't care if my husband died. They needed to be paid, and I had to still function. So I wanted to teach them how to do the same. And I've seen it, honestly, they've done really well. By no means are we perfect, but I've seen the fruits of that, and I'm so proud of where they've come.
You mentioned, all of us can say things at the wrong time, meaning well. What would you say really encouraged you the most? So as when you're walking with someone else that's going through grief, so you're not the one going through it.
Right.
What would you encourage those people of how to be there for someone, when to talk, when not to talk, when to give gifts, when not?
Right. I would say be comfortable sitting with someone in their grief. And if you're not, that's okay. Meet them through your needs or through your giftings, And so there were people who financially could bless us, and they did. And that was amazing. But then I had friends that maybe couldn't financially bless us, but could come over at night after I put the kids to bed, and they could just sit with me, because that was a really hard time. That was usually my time with him. I had friends that would go with me to different appointments or would request records. And so whatever your gifting is, whatever you have the capacity to do, draw from that first and foremost, but be comfortable not having to say something, because there's really nothing you can say to someone at that state that's going to help, especially if you've never experienced it. Now, when other widows would come to me and say things, most of the time it would be helpful, but sometimes they would say things, and I would think, I I don't want that for me. I don't want to always be sad. I don't want to feel like life is over now. But it was really helpful when people just acknowledged that what I went through was unfair and that they were praying for me and that they were there for me. That was probably the most helpful.
No, that really helps because it's easy to, I know for me personally, whenever someone has grieved like a really big loss, that sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to say. It's like you want to do so much and you're also kind of grieving for them.
Yes.
So being able to give us those wise tips so that we can also grieve well with others. And I'm sure right now that there are a lot of women and men who may be tuning in right now and they're just like, oh my gosh, Tiffany is speaking my language and I want to hopefully, get to where she's at.
Right.
So what would be your last word of encouragement, for someone who may be in the beginning of grieving or at the end or or even in the in-between?
Yeah, that's a good question. The lifting comes if you allow it to. There will be a lifting. I don't feel the same way that I did this time last year. And this time last year, I didn't feel the same way that I did the year prior when it first happened. And I needed others to speak that to me, especially people who had had significant losses, when they would tell me, you're not going to hurt the same way that you did at the beginning. Because at the beginning, you cannot fathom that the pain you're feeling will not always be there. Yeah. And that's really crippling because it's a high level of pain, so high. And to hear that it lessens, and I think you grow around it too. And you just find a way to function within it. But my biggest word of encouragement would be don't lose hope. And to be comfortable in your season, allow it to do what it needs to do, because there is a place for grief. Grief is love expressed. My husband was worth the grief. He was worth the pain and the tears, and I wanted to honor him. I didn't want to run from it. But I wanted to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I didn't want to set up camp there. And I think there's a difference in walking through something and honoring it, and then just sitting down and saying, well, this is it, and I'm here forever. So keep pressing on, keep moving through it, and just cling to hope. And believe that joy is on the horizon. It can come, and it looks different for everyone, but it is there, especially if the Lord is with you.
Well, and that that just opens it up to everybody. Breakups, getting fired from a job, even if someone at your job gets the promotion you want, or if you're about to buy a house and it falls through. Now that transitions from grief to just
disappointment.
Leveled disappointment that we all can have of saying, this feeling is not going to be here forever.
Right.
And that's hard because it feels that way.
It is hard.
I want to ask you real quick, because I know that it can feel guilty to move past grieving. Yeah. So how did you manage that? Because, you're still, birthdays come around, anniversaries come around. You just had your anniversary, giving space for that, but also not feeling guilty to remember the good times and your life is still going.
Yeah, I think you have to reframe. You've got to reframe what the different thing may be. So what would have been our 12-year anniversary was last Saturday. And I had already planned the month prior, that I was going to do some fun things throughout the day. And so I asked some girlfriends, I gave them time slots. I was like, these are the time slots, can you fill any of them? And so they were so sweet. I had a friend that we did lunch and pedicures. Another one went to church and did dinner. And so I have learned to prepare for those days, and also just to make the choice. Okay, do I want to stay home and be sad? And that first year I did. I didn't force myself to be happy. On the anniversary, the first anniversary of his passing, I went out to his grave. And I took this quilt that was made out of his shirts, laid on it, I journaled, I prayed, I cried. And that's what I needed. But I knew this year, I was like, okay, I'm ready to do something a little bit different. And for me, I've had to remove the guilt because, number one, I know that I fulfilled my vows to my husband, and they were till death do us part. I fulfilled that covenant before him and the Lord, and I know that I've honored him not only in his death, but when he was alive. And so I'm so thankful for him and the time we had together. But I know that I am free biblically to move forward. And that not just even in marriage, but in life. And I know that's what he would want for me. It was interesting. We had a conversation a couple of weeks before he passed about what would you do if something happened to me, or we both asked each other that. And so I just feel like that was the Lord's way of somehow allowing that conversation to be had. And that conversation too gave me the permission. Like we already had this talk. Like I know he would want me to keep moving. So yeah, that's definitely, it's a good question, because there is a lot of guilt that comes with moving forward. People don't even like to say moving on, but moving forward. And it's, it's semantics at the end of the day, but there should not be a guilt for continuing to live life, especially as believers. If our loved one is in heaven, we know heaven is full of joy and peace. There's no sorrow, there's no pain. Then I'm free to experience healing here, because he's not in heaven lacking. And I know he wouldn't want me on earth or our children, to lack.
Well, and you said you chose joy. And I think before your feet hit the ground, whether being stuck in traffic all the way to losing a loved one, like just something stressful, to true grief, before my feet hit the ground, God, I trust you today. I choose joy today. Because the happiness is obviously the circumstantial feeling, but joy is just unconditional, flowing from the Lord if we let it. And just choosing that before our feet hit the ground, whatever the day is going to hold. It might be an awesome day and you don't even have to struggle through anything. Right. But at least you chose it beforehand, not after, because that gets harder.
Absolutely.
But to your point, God has space for all of that.
Yes.
And he uses everything. And as we're closing, I just want to say, as your friend, and even just watching that from afar, how much I wasn't going through that situation, but I had other things that I wouldn't even compare them, but because of how you handled it, it helped me check myself and walk some things out with my head up high, going, I can do this, not me, but through the Lord and through his strength. And I know you've heard this story, and it's the same thing that it's
blessed me. And I think too,
it's awesome.
What we were just talking about is that the Lord really carried you in a supernatural way. And I think we can see the handprints of God all over it, because people have looked at you and your family and it's just like, wow, how are they smiling? How are they still living life? And you can say that it's all because of the Lord. And that was also a prayer that you prayed, right?
It was, I prayed on one of my many walks. I was like, God, just give us supernatural healing. Supernatural emotional healing was my specific prayer. And then I would just declare, the joy of the Lord is my strength. This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. And that's Psalm 118. And so, I just would declare those things over us and believed for them.
I love that. And for those that are watching and listening, God has the same thing for you, whatever you're going through, whatever's in the past, now, ahead. God wants to redeem and restore all the things, and we might not understand it, but he will give peace through the not understanding and getting to a point where you can have fun. You can still have a great life, and you can laugh, and just the joy set before you in the midst of hardship. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Absolutely.
It's still mind baffling because of your choice to trust God so well. It's not, our brains can't understand that you chose that, but our hearts in the trust in the Lord know that he's so faithful, and it's amazing.
And the word of God promises that weeping may endure for a night, but joy does come in the morning. So as women of God, women of faith, we have that promise that we can cling to, that's attached, to eternity. It's attached to something eternal, that this is temporary. And that he truly does hold all of our lives in his hands.
You know what I heard this week? I think it was at your masterclass, that we think joy comes in the morning. And so we think when the sun rises, joy can be right now. My morning can be right now. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, so that means it's morning somewhere. And so my joy can be right now. And just, we don't have to wait until we even feel it. We can speak joy before it matches up with our feelings.
And his mercies are new every morning. And so what I came to find with that scripture, because it was one I clung to a lot, because I'd be like, okay, but I'm sad again tonight. And it was like, God was like, but this is a cycle. Like, you may be sorrowful tonight, but tomorrow morning you're going to feel a level of peace. And without fail, no matter how hard the night was, I would wake up with just a renewed spirit, ready to go on my morning walk. And it was just enough to fill my cup for that day. And so sometimes it's a cycle. It's not always that you're going to be sad for one night and then you wake up joyful and the joy stays. Sometimes it's a pattern and a cycle you've got to go through several times. But for me, I knew no matter how bad of a grief wave, is what I called them, I would be hit and knocked over by, I knew that there was going to be reprieve. I knew that joy would come. And when it did, it was a breath of fresh air. And for however long it stayed, and thankfully with grief, those waves got further and further apart. They still crash every now and again, but I know now, especially in this, part of the journey, that it doesn't stay like that forever. But in the beginning, it can feel like that. So don't lose hope.
Yeah.
And know that it does. Joy comes in the morning.
Yeah. And we pray that this conversation encouraged you, moved you, blessed you. And we would love for you to, put in the comments or even, you can tag us on Instagram and on Facebook and let us know, how are you going to choose joy?
Yeah.
We're not saying that everything's going to be perfect, right? But what can you do to begin to cultivate even a small sense of joy in your life?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Music for me in queso, I'm going to be honest.
Yes.
But what about for y'all? Let's just end with that because, it can get heavy. And walking through things and choosing the spiritual life can get heavy. So what are just some fun things that people wouldn't even say are spiritual that help? Because Mexican food, walks, and then fun music help me.
Yeah.
I love the sun. Yes. I love just even being here in Texas, even though the weather's kind of crazy up and down. I love being able to go outside and to get all of that sun on my skin. Yes. I also love being with my family, being able to be outside, and I love listening to a good podcast or a good YouTube show like this one here, but that's what makes me happy.
Yeah. Dr. Pepper, definitely not spiritual, but I love Dr. Pepper. There'd be days I'm like, I just need an ice cold Dr. Pepper. I go and I walk the sun. Just having the sun
about that
just hit my skin. I love that. And I love to shop. That brings me some joy. So yeah.
I love that. Well, we're so grateful for you watching this with us, joining with us. Like Natasha said, write in the comments what your journey has been with joy. Follow us, share this with your friends, family, neighbors, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And this has been In the Middle.